Chapter 281, Loki versus Banner. On the arena stage, the two contestants took their places. Dr. Bruce Banner stood opposite Loki, the Nine Realms' foremost sorcerer. The third match was about to begin. Unlike the previous two bouts, the Asgardians in the stands were unusually quiet. They no longer waved their arms or shouted encouragement for Loki. It was as if the crowd had suddenly learned how to behave. When they spoke, it was in low voices, and their whispers were all about the sorcerer from Kamartaj, Banner. They murmured that he looked frail, even a little pot-bellied, so he probably wasn't very strong. Banner heard them. He didn't mind their remarks about his belly. Instead, he allowed himself to spin a different narrative in his head. The hush misled him. In myths, even gods schemed for power. In a place like Asgard, where princes jostled for the throne, a prince who drew no cheers must have fallen behind in the struggle. The lack of applause had to mean Loki had lost favor to the elder prince, Thor. Banner's thoughts raced to images of ancient emperors and palace intrigues. He felt a twinge of pity for Loki. The outcome of such a power struggle could be ugly. He squared his shoulders, clasped his hands before his chest, and offered a ceremonious salute. "Your Highness, I am Bruce Banner, a sorcerer of Kamartaj." His manners were impeccable, so proper that even a strict Mordo could not fault him. But Loki, who had been standing with his hands behind his back, staring at Banner with a proud, guarded look, flared up as if Banner's expression had wounded him. Loki's eyes went hard. He straightened, then reared his head like a great cat whose pride had been stung. Banner froze for a beat, guilt gnawing at him. Oh no, Banner thought. The prince must be under immense pressure. He had come out against expectations and wasn't favored. Banner's sympathetic look must have cut him. He scrambled for an apology. "I'm sorry, Your Highness. I was just, thinking. Cold sweat broke out across his brow. The briefcase in his hands began to feel slick from his palms. What excuse could explain that look without sounding patronizing? He tried to find the right words, but the apology came out strained and inelegant. Loki's jaw tightened. He pointed at himself, voice laced with contempt. "I, Loki, Prince of Asgard," he intoned, then fixed his gaze toward Odin in the stands. "Son of Odin, god of mischief, bearing a glorious mission." He stepped forward. "Your victory ends here, foolish Midgardian." He smiled, arrogant and cruel. "You should be honored that you are allowed to cross swords with a noble god." The whispers in the crowd died. Though many Asgardians favored Thor and looked down on Loki's reliance on cunning and illusion rather than brute strength, their pride in Asgard was absolute. Loki's grand proclamation struck a chord. The subdued audience rose to its feet. The cheers came surging back, louder than before. "This is Asgard, the center of the Nine Realms. Gods do not lose. Loki, Loki, victory, victory." The arena reverberated. In the lounge, Tony Stark stroked his chin and raised an eyebrow, watching for the moment Banner might unleash whatever power lay within. In the stands, Leon grinned and teased Odin. "Prince Loki seems very confident. My earlier accident didn't slow him down, did it?" Odin's gaze lingered on Banner. He was quiet for a moment, then said faintly, "It's fine." On the stage, Loki spread his arms and drank in the cheers, his face bright with triumph as though the outcome were already settled. Banner, standing opposite him and scratching his cheek, felt oddly out of place, like a member of the audience who'd been dragged onto a stage. But he also breathed a small sigh of relief. It seemed Loki had discarded any offense from earlier. Excuse me," Banner said, raising the briefcase and trying to steady his voice. "I am a beastmaster. I have a few magical creatures inside who assist me in combat. May I bring them with me?" He added quickly, before Loki could react. "I know using magical creatures might be considered ganging up. If it's not allowed, I'll set the briefcase at the edge of the stage." Despite the roar of the crowd, Loki heard him perfectly. He looked down at Banner with thinly veiled contempt. A beastmaster. What sort of beasts could this Midgardian have? In Loki's mind, the idea of a backward mortal commanding wild creatures was laughable. He had no patience for the humble man's display. "Do what you like," Loki said with a sneer. "Whatever tricks you bring will be nothing but futile struggles before me." He folded his arms behind his back and lifted his chin. "Instead of embarrassing yourself here, why not simply kneel and surrender? Isn't that what you all want? To be conquered? To be enslaved?" Your so-called challenge is only a plea for Asgard's mercy. Why not save us the trouble? Loki looked at Banner as if victory were already his. He had worried for a moment that this opponent might be as formidable as the previous two Midgardians, but a Beastmaster? He saw no danger now. Chapter 282, Chapter Fantastic Beasts. Ah? I can fight with the Fantastic Beasts? You agreed? Banner's voice was bright with surprise. Thank you so much, he added, grinning. I told those kids I'd take them to fight the gods. This will make them so happy. Loki's brow tightened. Banner's tone felt like an insult, as if Loki himself were some exotic specimen on display. He opened his mouth to sneer, but Banner set a battered leather case on the ground and clicked it open. He half squatted, one hand plunged into the case, and glanced up. So, shall we begin? Loki clasped his hands behind his back and shook his head, a smile curling at the corner of his mouth. Fools, he said. You know you can't win, yet you still strut. I'm eager to see how pathetic you'll look. Banner's mouth twitched. Loki's barbs were as legendary as any Stark quip. He'd never thought anyone could outdo the Stark brothers in insolence, yet here stood an Asgardian capable of doing so. He didn't rise to the bait. Calmly, he leaned into the case and called into it. Hey, everyone, out! The battle has started. All eyes turned to the leather case. The silence stretched. Curiosity was thick in the air. Loki watched, calm and amused, two daggers materializing silently in his palms behind his back. If your fantastic beasts are just props in a case, then you. A sudden, piercing cry of an eagle cut him off. The leather case exploded outward as a massive gray head burst free, followed by sweeping wings, talons, and a horse-like body. A hippogriff from the Hogwarts world had emerged. The creature threw its head up, and a powerful nudge slammed Banner onto its back. Its wings, several meters across, beat the air hard enough to whip a gale through the arena. Banner and beast rocketed into the sky. Loki was buffeted by the blast, eyes narrowed against the wind. You really, he managed, a laugh dying on his lips, but his expression froze as more creatures tumbled from the case. A 7-meter, entirely golden bird with 3 pairs of wings launched itself into the air, a thunderbird. It caught up with Banner in seconds, a sharp arrowed silhouette against the sky, crackling thunder trailing its passage. Then a red phoenix burst free, flaming and circling above. A Norwegian ridgeback, a hulking dragon-like lizard, lumbered out and let loose a deafening roar. Sulphurous breath and the stench of scorched scales hit Loki full in the face, whipping his black hair back. Even his tense features rippled with the force. Gulp, Loki said under his breath, staring up at the 10-meter ridgeback and the winged thunderbird. Oh, I hate lightning. From the hippogriff, Banner shouted, Attack! The ridgeback opened its jaws and a jet of scorching flames surged toward Loki. The thunderbird, wings spread, screamed and called down a column of lightning that shredded through the fire and wrapped itself around the god of mischief. Thunder and flame braided through the arena. Heat and sound rolled over the crowd like a tide. The stands erupted in gasps. With a bang, the door to the Asgardian warrior's restroom flew open. Thor burst out, hair mussed, calling, Loki, Loki! In Kamartaj's quiet room, Wong clutched his staff and asked, Is it over? Tony Stark shook his head. His glasses projected Jarvis's analysis in tiny numbers and graphs. No, he said brusquely. Based on Thor's data, all this thunder and fire will at most give him a bad hair day. Tony's earlier magic had stung Thor partly because it was precisely targeted and partly due to 10 Rings enhancement. He didn't think Banner would topple Loki with fantastic beasts alone. In the stands, Leon stole a glance at Odin. The All-Father shut his eyes, unreadable. Leon snorted softly. For several heartbeats, the thunder and fire twisted around Loki. Then, with a green flash, Loki stepped out of the vortex. His hair smoked at the tips, his face was streaked black with soot, but otherwise he seemed unscathed. The Asgardians in the audience let out a long, relieved breath. Banner, still astride the hippogriff, registered the resilience with a flicker of surprise. Loki's defenses were sturdier than he'd expected. So energy attacks from the beasts aren't doing much, Banner muttered aloud, thinking through options. Okay, time for something more physical. The leather case rustled again, and more creatures poured out, bulkier, heavier things. Erumpents, mountainous beasts with deadly horns, thudded onto the ground. Graphorns, squat and heavily armored, stamped and sniffed. and the Nundu, whose mere breath was poison, slithered into view, its scaled body moving with an eerie silence. They roared, bellowed, and pivoted toward Loki with single-minded focus. Banner named and directed them like a conductor. Erumpent, flank him, Grafhorn, stomps, Nundu, bite and hold. The Norwegian Ridgeback lashed its tail in a brutal arc. The Erumpent lowered its horn and charged. The Grafhorn brought down its massive foot in a killing stomp. The Nundu struck with lethal speed, teeth flashing. The Thunderbird and Phoenix dove, their beaks and talons aiming for Loki's eyes and face. The attack came in a dazzling storm of claws, hooves, bites, and horns. Loki was swept off his feet, smashed by a dragon tail, slammed in the chest by an Erumpent's horn, then driven under the Grafhorn's grinding weight. Heavy feet pounded him again and again. He tasted blood and poison and felt the sting of repeated blows. None of the wounds were instantly fatal, but the accumulation was brutal. Contusions, trampling injuries, lacerations, a bite wound seeping dark venom. Loki's mind went blank. He had always been the one who dealt humiliation, the schemer who bested grander opponents in style. Now he lay in a world of pain, while fantastic beasts battered him senseless. He could only picture the Asgardians in the stands, Odin's calm, and the cruel finality of disgrace. He realized, with a cold horror, that if he fell here, if he was shown up by immortals' beasts, his name would be laughed at across the god realm. The thought alone felt worse than any blow. Chapter 283. Loki is about to sound the clarion call for a counterattack. Loki felt he couldn't be more miserable than he was at that moment. For an instant, he even wondered if there would ever be a place for him in Asgard again. The roar from the Asgardian stands had died down, but in his ears, it was like an overwhelming tide of mockery drilling into him. If he could do it over, he thought, he'd shove Vandal or Hogun into the arena himself. Damn it, all because that Kamartaj sorcerer kept letting that abominable beast trample him. Fury flamed across Loki's face from neck to cheeks. He squirmed under the Grafhorn's feet, searching for any opening to turn the tide. Then Banner's case stirred. A moment later, a Niffler popped out, clung to the case's rim with its nose twitching, eyes bright. The little creature scrambled free, and a line of Cornish pixies streamed out behind it. Mischievous, iron blue, and about 20 centimeters tall, they scattered like schoolchildren on dismissal, screeching and hunting for pranks. No amount of shouting from Banner coaxed them back. Luckily, the arena's energy shield kept them from escaping. But the pixies and the Niffler had other targets in mind. They turned on Loki, who was already being swarmed by magical beasts. They weren't going to bother Banner. After all, Banner harbored a certain green giant that shouldn't be trifled with. A dozen pixies dove toward Loki, like a swarm of bees attacking a honey thief. The Niffler had already reached the Grafhorn's feet and then leapt onto Loki's shoulder, immediately pawing at the shiny things he wore. Loki, ducking attacks from the other creatures, suddenly felt a lightness on his head. His crown was gone. He turned, bewildered, to find a furry black Niffler next to his shoulder, its pouch stuffed with a crown far too big for it. "What are you? Put that down, my crown!" Loki barked, lunging for it. The Niffler was maddeningly nimble, darting left and right. No matter how fast Loki reached, he couldn't snatch the crown back. As if being attacked and having his crown stolen weren't enough, the pixies arrived in force. Some yanked his hair, some tore at his clothes, others stretched his mouth from side to side. Loki was in a miserable state, struggling to fend them off. Rage flared from his core outward. His face went blazing red as if it might spurt blood. "Enough!" he roared, voice fraying on the edge of hysteria. Divine power erupted from him. A blast of green energy burst up from under the Grafhorn's feet like a detonating missile, driving the Niffler, the pixies, the Grafhorn, the Norwegian Ridgeback, and the rest of the beasts away. Whether a multi-ton fire dragon or a featherlight pixie, all were hurled back as if struck by a colossal hammer, crashing to the ground. In the center of the blast stood Loki, hair and clothes in disarray, eyes bloodshot. "I am a god," he shouted. "You ignorant, despicable, lowly creatures, how dare you humiliate me?" His injuries were only superficial. Bites and trampling couldn't truly harm him. But injury no longer mattered. Only one thought occupied his mind. He had to rip that damned Kamartaj sorcerer off the hippogriff and plunge his dagger into him 100 times. Loki had never felt such intense hatred for anyone. He scanned the fallen magical creatures, then fixed his gaze on Banner with overflowing fury. "You will pay for this," he vowed under his breath. He thrust both hands outward, and two daggers slid seamlessly into his palms. As he took a step toward Banner, dozens of identical Lokis appeared across the arena without warning, standing in corners and among the beasts, each indistinguishable from the real prince. Banner, perched on the hippogriff, blinked. He'd seen duplication tricks before. The Kamartaj spell, form of icon, could create copies, but he didn't know how it was being used here. He began to think through counters, but on the ground the Lokis were already moving, encircling the creatures that were getting back to their feet. They advanced, daggers glinting coldly. This was bad. Banner felt the panic spike. A couple of stabs wouldn't hurt a thick-skinned fire dragon or an erumpent much, but the Lokis were attacking nifflers and Cornish pixies too, tiny things that couldn't withstand blades. And Loki wouldn't limit himself to dagger strikes. The Asgardian prince's repertoire couldn't possibly be so narrow. "Quick, get out of the way," Banner barked, guiding the beasts to dodge and coaxing the hippogriff to descend. He drew his wand from his robe, preparing a spell. But as he reached for it, the Lokis on the ground all seemed to pass straight through the bodies of the beasts. A Norwegian ridgeback swatted at what it thought was Loki. A pixie fluttered wildly. Each collided with a dagger-wielding Loki, yet no contact occurred. The Loki's blades sliced through air and through creatures as if the figures weren't solid. Some Lokis stabbed and turned to strike again. The blade passed through a niffler, sending the little animal into a frantic flail and high-pitched squeals. After a few cries, it touched its chest and discovered it was unharmed. The crown was even half stuffed back in its pouch. It became clear, all these Lokis were illusions. The magical creatures quickly realized the problem. The Thunderbird, having risen again, snapped back to attack, but its talons closed on empty air. Banner, wand in hand, watched with a puzzled frown. He couldn't figure out Loki's purpose in sending shadow copies, and he stayed on guard for whatever came next. "Everyone, scatter!" Banner ordered. Out of caution, he had the magical beasts pull back. The Phoenix and the Thunderbird circled back to his side. Banner leaned against the hippogriff's broad back and scanned the arena below. Each Loki looked real and seemed to be battling the creatures, but they all passed through the animals as if they were phantoms, nothing but illusions. "How are they all fake? Where is the real one?" he murmured. "Or is that the point?" He flicked his wand, remembering Professor Flitwick's lessons at Hogwarts, one smooth wrist movement. Expelliarmus, Hominem Revelio, Apparicium. Banner threw out 3 revealing spells in succession. He didn't know what kind of magical trick Loki's shadow clones were, but it made sense to use every detection charm he knew. The spells washed over the Lokis. Each figure wavered, then solidified again. His magic wasn't strong enough to dispel the illusion, but it did disturb them. Each Loki flickered. That meant they were all fakes. So where was the true Loki? Banner, by training and temperament, calmed himself and ran through possibilities. Loki could be invisible, underground, or had simply left the arena. Before he finished the thought, Loki's voice came from his side, triumphant. "That's right. He's in the sky to your left." Banner looked. The Thunderbird was circling to his left. Its back seemed empty until Loki suddenly materialized there. He must have climbed up while invisible and ridden the beast. The Thunderbird screamed, flapped, and twisted, trying to throw him off. Loki leapt like Tarzan, both hands flinging a dagger forward, eyes fixed on Banner. "As I said, you will pay the price." In a single, furious bound, he closed the few meters to the hippogriff. Banner's heart hammered. He tried to dodge, but Loki was already almost on him. Instinct made him shout, "Expelliarmus!" The spell knocked the dagger from Loki's left hand, but another blade flashed toward Banner with deadly intent. "No, don't!" Banner cried. "Don't do this. You'll let him out." There was pleading in his voice. He wanted to defeat Loki by his own strength, not be humiliated. The plea only fueled Loki. The prince's humiliation had turned into glee. His movements became quicker, his sneer wider. He delighted in an opponent begging for mercy. With a cruel grin, Loki plunged a dagger into Banner's chest. Blood blossomed across Banner's tunic. Loki hauled the blade free and licked the crimson with satisfied contempt. Mortals are still mortals, he spat. It's over, Midgardian. He grabbed Banner's shoulder with his left hand and drove the knife in again. Blood sprayed. Another hot, bright splash. Loki drank in the sound and let himself laugh, reveling in the moment, as if he could already hear the arena erupting in his honor. Banner's voice dwindled. His hands lay limp before him, neither able to push Loki away nor to grasp at rescue. Loki laughed harder at the sight of such helplessness. Go on, go, quickly, leave, he mocked, lowering his head in contempt. Still struggling, still refusing to surrender. Foolish mortal. Then, thump, thump, thump. A heartbeat like a mammoth stamping through ice rolled from Banner's chest. Huge, impossible. It was joined a beat later by cheering from the stands. Loki! Loki! The Asgardians believed their prince had won and roared their approval. The heartbeat, though, carried far beyond the crowd. The magical creatures in the sky and on the ground froze, as if obeying some command. In perfect, practiced order, they turned and fled. On the field, the fire dragon and the Graphoorn locked eyes, then charged together toward the leather suitcase and scrambled inside. The Niffler abandoned the crown it had been stuffing and shot like a black bolt into the case. The giggling goblins stopped mid-chuckle, scrambled away, huddled together, and rolled back to their old haunts. The Nundu and the Erumpent turned and fled with the rest. Even the Phoenix and the Hippogriff followed, the Hippogriff flipping, shaking Loki from its back in the process. As it dove into the suitcase, it bit the lock shut with its beak. In 3 seconds, the beasts had executed a practiced retreat. Loki, who had just tumbled from the Hippogriff, blinked in surprise, his triumphant smile frozen on his face. Before he hit the ground, he caught a look at Banner. The hero's chest wet with blood, strange green veins crawling under the skin and racing across his torso, and wherever they passed, his flesh bulged and swelled with visible speed. Is this mortal faking something else? Loki's frown deepened as he rolled several times to break his fall and clear his head. Chapter 285, the smile on Loki's face froze. Only Loki and Banner remained on the arena stage. Loki patted himself down and stood up with affected elegance. Across from him, Banner kicked up a cloud of dust as he pushed himself to his feet. Through the haze and sunlight, a hulking, shadowy figure began to take shape. Loki spread his hands, then gripped 2 daggers again. I've had enough, he said coldly. As a sorcerer from Midgard, all your struggles are meaningless. He ground his teeth. If you don't want to suffer worse injuries, you'd best surrender now. Roar! Before Loki could finish his threat, a roar more terrifying than any Norwegian ridgeback cut across the arena, overtaking even the crowd's cheers. Through the dust, a tall, green figure tore forward, roaring. Its massive foot struck the ground with enough force to crater stone, and the figure crashed into Loki like a freight train. Loki went flying like a meteor, slamming hard against the energy shield, then rebounded and fell back to the ground. Hulk stood where Loki had been, hands pounding his chest, roaring to the sky. Hulk! The crowd's cheers turned to stunned gasps. In the Camartage lounge, Tony clenched his fist at the sound. He's out! Nice work, Hulk! Mordo and Hamir exchanged glances. Looks like we won't have to go on stage, one said. As long as we win, it doesn't matter who goes on, Old Wang shrugged. Pietro hovered anxiously, pacing and clutching his head. No, don't, he blurted. I wanted to fight those mythic gods. He half hoped Hulk would lose. The others laughed. Give it up, Tony said, pointing toward the arena. Hulk's angry. He'll end this fast. On the stage, Loki lay in the dust, staring in disbelief at the green behemoth he'd thought a mere scrawny mortal. Anger and humiliation flared across his face. Even in changed guise, the opponent was still a Midgard mortal. How dare he humiliate a god so thoroughly? Loki slammed his hand on the ground and pushed himself up, dust clinging to his cloak. I've had enough! I've had enough! He muttered, gripping his dagger. He pointed the blade straight at the Hulk. This is your final warning, mortal. Not everyone is qualified to insult me. I am a noble god. Hulk looked at the disheveled god, frowned, and snorted. Loki snapped. He charged, daggers flashing, and with each step illusory clones multiplied around him. Dozens, then hundreds of Lokis filled the arena. Their shadows stretched and coiled around Hulk's shadow like ribbons, blotting him in darkness. Loki's shadow magic. When those shadows bound Hulk's own, they immobilized him. Hulk felt it, a constriction across his body. He twisted but couldn't budge. Humph, struggle like a dying fish. It's all futile. Hundreds of Lokis intoned at once, surrounding Hulk and lifting their blades until they glinted bloodily in the sun. Hulk stopped, turned his head slowly, nostrils flaring with disdain. Then his muscles bulged. "Hulk!" he shouted, and with a single roar he ripped free of the shadowy bonds. The Lokis stared in astonishment. Hulk's roar continued. He clapped his massive hands together in front of him. Bang! A hurricane of force exploded outward, shoving air aside with the power to overturn mountains. The blast would have sent any real opponent flying, even Thor, but the Lokis did not move. They were illusions. For a heartbeat, Hulk hesitated, and then, like mist under morning sun, the 100 phantoms dissolved. Only the real Loki remained, dagger raised behind Hulk. Loki realized his shadow magic had failed, and canceled it himself, already in the exact spot he intended to strike from. "It's over, Midgardian. Now you will pay for your presumption," he hissed. The inverted dagger in his hand shimmered with an uncanny light and lengthened. With a cold, arrogant smile, Loki drove the blade into Hulk's waist. It was forged from Uru metal, a weapon that had once pierced even his brother. A mortal might disguise himself, but it wouldn't save him now. Loki grinned as he prepared to yank the dagger free and slash again, but suddenly a huge green hand closed over both the hilt and his wrist. A shadow fell over him from above, and the smile on Loki's face slowly froze. He turned his head and looked up. A massive green face filled his view, nostrils flaring and steam puffing from them. Anger radiated from the creature's features. Loki felt his confident words vaporize. If you're willing to surrender now," he began, voice thinning. "Hulk." The sentence collapsed as a fierce hand ripped the dagger from Loki's grip and the body it was lodged in. Hulk grinned, then hoisted the god into the air as easily as a toy. He slammed Loki down in a brutal, bone-shattering impact that fractured the ground into jagged rock and left a human-shaped crater. Loki lay inside it, stunned. Hulk wasn't done. He grabbed Loki again, flung him into the air, and drove him down on the other side with thunderous force. Another human-shaped crater. Again and again, pick up, slam down, each blow pulverized the arena floor more. Hulk played his opponent like a whack-a-mole, relentless and inexorable. Bang, bang, bang. Loki was slammed into the ground like a meteor storm. One slam made a shallow crater. Bang. A harder slam made a deeper pit. Bang. The earth around the Hulk was a lattice of Loki-shaped hollows, one pit connected to the next. Around the Hulk, a circular trench formed whose radius was about Loki's height. Bang! Hulk's final hammering released his hands. He glanced down at the Loki in the pit, snorted, and spat with contempt. Such a weak god. Then he turned to the spectators, thumped his chest a few times, and roared, "Hulk!" Below, in the pit, Loki lay with one hand on his chest, the other limp over his head. His eyes were empty, devoid of light, stripped of life, yet unnervingly peaceful, like someone who had just died. A priest in black robes could have stepped up, traced a cross over him, intoned "Amen, rest in peace," and sprinkled earth on his chest without it feeling out of place. If anything seemed more fitting, it would be a priest shouting, "By Odin, may Loki enter Valhalla." The arena fell into stunned silence. No one had expected Hulk's brutal display. The first to recover were the Earth guests, especially the three mages who had already seen Hulk smashing in other worlds. Tony was the earliest to react. Wearing blackout shades and a tan mage robe, he clapped and pushed through the doors. "Hulk, well done," he cheered, hands raised above his head. Mordo and Wong followed, joining in the applause. Their scattered clapping echoed oddly in the quiet gladiatorial arena, loud enough to feel like an intrusion, like distant guests openly trampling on the host's dignity. Pepper, embarrassed, tugged Tony's sleeve and murmured that they should be more discreet. She didn't know that if Tony kept up his show, the Asgardian crowd would be converted into instant fans of Hulk. Tony, however, had wanted this. Ever since he'd learned Asgard styled itself the ruler of the 9 realms, he'd wanted to remind them Earthlings had their own masters. He was about to say more when applause suddenly swelled from the stands. The Asgardians, one by one, rose and cheered, clapping hard and shouting, "Hulk, Hulk, Hulk!" Hulk's raw, straightforward fighting had struck a chord with these warlike people. That brutal slamming and wild roar felt like true warrior craft to them. Loki's defeat, they thought, was only natural. Look at that green giant, the broad chest and mighty arms. He was a true warrior. Even from the Asgardian lounge came cheers. Thor, grinning guilelessly, pounded his chest and shouted his approval. For a moment, the Earth contingent looked surprised. Were all Asgardians this boisterous? Tony felt suddenly that he'd held back too much. He should have been the one on the dice taking these cheers. But Hank Banner, Hulk, stood in the arena beaming and raising his arms, reveling in the adulation. The crowd's enthusiasm reminded him of the raucous cheers back at Hogwarts. On the dice, Leon turned to Odin. "May we announce the results, Your Majesty?" Odin, who had been resting with his eyes closed, opened them and glanced warily at Loki in the pit. "Is this Banner truly a mage?" he asked. "He looks more like one of our warriors." Leon shook his head. "Not a warrior. He used the characteristic magic of Camartage." Odin regarded him with a look of bemused disbelief. Turning into a hulking smash machine was Camartage's signature? He didn't argue. Tapping his spear Gungnir on the ground, an unseen divine current rippled through the arena, and Odin's voice carried to every ear. "The third match goes to Camartage." He paused, then looked at Leon. "Lord Leon, you have won 3 of the 5 contests. Do you wish to continue?" Despite the formality, there was humanity in Odin's gaze. Leon considered it briefly. There was no danger if they pushed further. Asgard would be fine. But since the two sides were allies, there was no need to press the advantage too far. "Let's continue," he decided. "I've yet to see the legendary Warriors 3. I'd like to watch them." Odin smiled and nodded, tapping his spear again. "The 4th battle will begin in 30 minutes. The competitors filtered out. Hulk left to cheers and transformed back into Banner as he exited, holding up his pants, snatching his briefcase, and hurrying toward the lounge. Loki, still looking like a corpse, was borne off by Thor back to his chambers. The arena quieted. For the 4th match, Asgard sent forward Vandal, famed as the first swordsman of the 9 realms. After the previous losses, he entered the arena with head bowed and shoulders tight, a marked lack of confidence. Camartage didn't need prompting. Tony, Banner, Wong, and Mordo exchanged looks and held Pietro back on the bench, eager though he was. Stepping forward instead was Wong. Wong straightened his robes and strode onto the stage with head high and chest puffed. His display was flashier than the earlier matches. Rings of Ragador, Vishanti's holy blade, the winds of Watumb, attack, block, counter. Vandal's swordsmanship was formidable, but then Wong began the mystic art of portals, again and again, conjuring portals that redirected Vandal's own strikes back at him. In a spectacular use of portals, he made the first swordsman strike himself. 20 minutes later, amid enthusiastic applause, Wong returned to the lounge with a draw, face flushed with pride. It wasn't a full-strength performance, but he'd held his ground against one of the 9 realms' finest. Half an hour later, the 5th bout saw Grandmaster Hamir enter the field. After a dozen minutes of exchange, Hamir narrowly fell to Volstagg, the Lion of the Heavenly Palace. With those results, 3 wins, 1 draw, 1 loss, Camartage took the challenge. Asgard salvaged a little pride with Volstagg's victory, but the evening's matches had already set the crowd alight. Most guests would have been expected to leave and prepare for the banquet, but Thor, still riled, leaped back onto the arena and challenged Tony to another fight. Tony, who had more tricks up his sleeve, curled a lip and, despite Pepper's protests, stepped back into the ring. Their duel stretched on for a long time, beams of light and bolts of lightning streaking across the sky, metallic clashes ringing from above to below. By the time the final blows fell, the sun had set and night had come. Night fell, and the Asgardian divine realm glittered with lantern light. The heavenly palace at the center of the realm burned brighter than usual. Its blade-like architecture and gilded walls spoke of a long, glorious history. But tonight, the palace felt livelier than ever. To honor the visitors from Camartage, Odin had opened his great hall for a banquet. Divine realm handmaidens in printed robes and whalebone-boned skirts ushered Leon and his party inside. The 2 princes and the Asgardian warriors lined the long hall, and down its center ran a table piled with delicacies, stretching from the entrance all the way up below Odin's throne. Odin made a brief speech from his throne, invited Leon to sit beside him, and the feast began. It was raucous. The Asgardian warriors celebrated as if they'd been starved for a year, loudly offering roasted lamb and flagons to anyone nearby. Pepper and Shirley felt out of place at first. Leon had said this trip would be a fight and then a meal before they headed home, so except for Tony and a handful of combatants still in battle robes, the rest were dressed casually. Against the Asgardians, who glittered with jewels and wore ceremonial finery, Tony and his group looked like they'd turned up to mooch off a family gathering. That didn't matter much. The banquet wasn't one of Earth's stiff, suit-and-tie affairs full of forced manners. These were warriors, drunk, loud, and hilariously sincere about it. Could someone who couldn't drink be called a warrior? Not in the Vikings book. No sooner had the feast started than Thor wedged himself into the seat next to Tony and Bruce. "Stark Banner, come drink," he boomed. "This is the best wine in our heavenly palace. Drink, drink again. Your bodies are made for this. Drink." He clinked cups with them in turn. One for Tony, one for him, one for Banner, one for him, knocking back each glass and laughing heartily as he smashed the goblets. After a few rounds, broken glass shimmered over the floor. Tony watched, amazed and increasingly impressed. Asgardian wine had a malt-forward aroma with a faint surge of unfamiliar energy. It tasted like a rich, nutrient tonic spiked with alcohol and left him flushed and warm. It was powerful, too powerful for an Earthling's constitution. Pepper had already been watching him for a few rounds. Her eyes had gone glossy, like someone trying not to cry. Tony felt a sour, guilty feeling knot his stomach. "I can't anymore. I'm going to the restroom," he said and escaped the drinking contest, leaving Thor to trade toasts with Banner. On his way out, he passed Shirley and Yelena, happily stuffing their faces. The food was absolute heaven to them. Pietro was mingling with the warriors, and Mordo and Wong sat quietly, drinking beside the others. Natasha, accompanied by Wanda, had become a center of attention. The Asgardian women were captivated by Wanda's power, and Natasha used the opportunity to gather information. Outside, the cool air sobered Tony a bit. He hadn't really been headed for the restroom. He just knew he couldn't take another cup. If he kept drinking, he had no idea how long Pepper would torment him back at their lodgings. He let out a rueful sigh. If this had been a few years ago, with the northern lights and the music and the boisterous warriors, he might have been embracing a few beautiful Asgardian women and talking late into the night. Now he could only hope Pepper chose mercy. "Sigh, what wonderful girls," he murmured, staring at the distant, glittering lights. Asgard at night wasn't so different from New York. People full of confidence and joy, descendants of a kingdom that spanned the 9 realms. "Why did you run out to brave the cold all by yourself? Looking for tonight's target, are you? Be careful. If Pepper catches you, she'll make sure you can't get out of bed tomorrow," teased a voice at his elbow. Tony didn't have to turn to know who it was. Leon leaned against the stone balustrade beside him. "I can't get out of bed? You'd better change the subject, or I'll assume you're projecting from your own embarrassment." Leon shrugged. "I did come out looking for a target, but it's not a person. Old man Odin's formalities get boring. I asked him to take me to the treasury to see the spoils. All kinds of interesting things. He's had people pack them already." "The casket of ancient winters and the eternal flame?" Tony asked, eyebrows lifting. "And the eye of Agamotto," Leon confirmed. Tony remembered Cap's warning. Old Captain America from the future had said the eternal flame would be connected to Asgard's destruction and was crucial to stopping the goddess of death, Hela. "Is it really okay to just take it?" he asked. "Of course," Leon said. "I'll only borrow it for 5 years. I need time to study the laws within it. Once I understand them, I'll give it back. It'll be returned long before Ragnarok, if it comes, so nobody loses anything." "I thought you intended to step in and save them," Tony said. "We'll see," Leon replied. "This is their family matter. What right have we to interfere?" Tony nodded slowly. Odin's children, Thor and Hela, had ignited the flames that could consume their home. If siblings tore their realm apart, it was their tragedy to bear. But Tony couldn't shake the image of the future Cap had shown him. He pictured it, 9 years from now, this brilliant hall reduced to ruin, survivors slaughtered or scattered by Thanos, the elder prince fallen into decadence and losing an eye, the second prince, having barely escaped Ragnarok, dead at Thanos' hands. Seeing the current laughter and joy made that future feel like a knife. "Leon," Tony said, voice tight. We have to protect Earth. His eyes burned under the lantern light, reflecting the color and the resolve that had pushed him through every impossible fight. Cut it out, Leon snapped, but he didn't answer Tony directly. Instead, he shot a look at him. Getting sentimental all of a sudden. What are you trying to do? Leon understood Tony. Tony could be sentimental, could drown in private sorrow, but it was always contained, private, in front of others, even Pepper. Tony would grin, make a joke, deflect. Even if he wanted to save the world single-handedly, he'd arched an eyebrow and say, "Me? Save the world? Best joke I've heard all day." The jibe worked. Tony straightened. Was I being sentimental? Leon, if you're asking me for dating tips, you could just say it. Like Wanda, I think. Tony babbled to cover the real subject. Leon held up a hand. Stop. I know what you're doing. You're still worried about Thanos. You want to feed the future intel to Odin so he and I can deal with Thanos early, nip it in the bud. You said that, Tony protested, palms up. Leon gave him a look that said he wasn't convinced. I thought you weren't worried anymore. Don't worry. I can handle Thanos. 2 of the Infinity Stones are with me. The TVA even sent me some discarded gems last time. How do you expect Thanos to succeed? Leon pointed at the starfield beyond the palace. Remember the Super Skrulls we recruited? Ever since they arrived in the universe, they've been searching for the remaining stones for me. Maybe they'll be enough to stop Thanos. And if Odin tries to step in now, he'll just fall into the Odin sleep, maybe even hasten his death. Cooperating with him could make things worse. Hearing Leon put it like that, much of Tony's nervousness eased into relief. Tony already knew these facts, but hearing them from Leon made them feel settled, inevitable. The last time he'd learned about the future, Leon's certainty had calmed him for days. When the worry returned, only Leon could quiet it again. All right, Tony said, clapping Leon on the shoulder. Our Superman, Clark, will fix everything. He thought a moment. So for now, we don't tell Asgard about the future. We'll wait until Ragnarok and then decide whether to help. Tony's distrust of Asgard wasn't blind. After all, they ruled Earth nominally and were outsiders in many ways. Leon raised an eyebrow and pointed at a nearby treetop. Then you're too late. Odin's been listening from up there for a while. Tony glanced up. Perched where light and shadow braided together sat a raven, black as coal. It tilted its head, met Tony's eyes, gave a slow, as if knowing nod, and then swept away into the distance. A raven? Tony blinked. The memories of Norse myths he'd memorized flickered. Odin's ravens, Hugin and Munin, were his eyes across the 9 realms. Tony's mouth opened and closed. So we're holding a secret meeting and Odin just listens in? I thought you knew. Leon started back toward the main hall. This is Odin's territory. He knows everything that happens in the palace. Of course I knew. Couldn't you have given me a little warning? Tony followed. As they re-entered the hall, they brushed past a small, green figure slipping away with his head bowed. Leon hesitated, then looked after him. Loki's silhouette faded into shadow. No one noticed the second prince departing. He moved alone, like a discarded toy. What's wrong? Admiring the scenery? Tony asked. Nothing. Leon's eyes went to Odin's throne. Odin was smiling down at him. Seems the banquet has a second act, Leon said softly. He hadn't expected Odin to act so quickly on a few whispered words about the future. Asgard used the Bifrost to open wormholes between the 9 realms, but besides the famous bridge, the outskirts of Asgard contained hidden passages linking to other star systems. Loki was using one of those secret routes to go to Jotunheim, the frost giant's realm. He'd left arrangements there to bring some frost giants back to Asgard. Originally, his plan was simple: disrupt Thor's succession ceremony. Thor should have been crowned God King months ago, but Kamartaj's interference had delayed the rites. Loki had schemed for a long time to sabotage the succession, make Thor commit a public error, and get him punished, thereby proving Loki's worth to their parents. Then the Kamartaj mages arrived, and everything changed, especially that damned Beastmaster, now a shadow that haunted Loki. Every time he closed his eyes, the image of a hulking, mocking figure lingered in his mind, a reminder of his own weakness, the unloved second prince, endlessly scheming but never respected. The ship landed with a dull thud. Loki stepped onto Jotunheim's glacier and walked to the cliff's edge to look down at the sleeping frost giants below. The shadows hid his face. He had a plan to ruin the banquet, make those Midgardians pay, and make his brother fall. No one would defile Asgard's honor. Back in the main hall, Leon and Odin stood side by side before the throne while the banquet raged below. Their gazes were fixed on the far end of Asgard. Through mountains and courtyards, a group had emerged from a cave, Loki leading a contingent of frost giants. He guided them toward the palace with practiced skill. "What would Sir Leon have me say?" Odin asked quietly. His face was grave. "Ragnarok is inevitable. I need not repeat the future." "So you still let Loki make his move? You're not going to have me act?" Leon suspected it was possible. Odin was older, craftier. Odin's smile was mild. "Don't worry, I will act later." Leon wasn't convinced. Act? As soon as Odin acted, he'd fall into the Odin sleep, or worse. How would he act and remain the same? The answer came as he watched the scene unfold at the palace's edge. Loki and his company landed in a flying craft. By terrible luck, or perhaps by Odin's cunning, an Asgardian party carrying 3 ornate chests was passing nearby. Those chests were unmistakably the spoils from Kamartaj. Among them, icy, storied, priceless, the frost giant's supreme treasure, the casket of ancient winters. Leon felt a surge of anger. "Clever, Odin. You said you'd act, but this isn't bluffing. You're baiting him." He rolled up his sleeves. Chapter 289, Icebox. Before Leon could move, Odin gripped his arm. "Please wait, Sir Leon. Loki is mischievous, yes, but he knows his limits." "Loki knows his limits?" Leon's mouth went dry. He watched Odin's face. Deep lines carved into the old All-Father, a perpetual wariness shadowing his features. Still, beneath that fatigue, one battle-hardened eye was as keen as ever. Leon knew that even if Odin spoke of Ragnarok as fate, he would still try every possible way to leave a sliver of hope for his children and his people. Whoever had routed the warriors carrying the gift boxes along the edge of Asgard had done so with intent. No normal procession would take that detour. Asgard, where power ruled, had no need for empty ceremony. If Loki and the frost giants had been brought out here, it had to be deliberate. Leon turned his head, and the scene snapped into focus. The transport team was moving along the road in front of Loki and his party. Loki had signaled the frost giants to stay hidden. His plan had been to lead them right into the palace. The convoy hadn't gone far when the bottom of one crate, the casket glowing with ice-blue light, suddenly gave way. It hit the ground, rolled, and ejected a cold that raised the hairs on Leon's arms. Rings of spectral blue light rippled out, chilling the air. To an ordinary passerby, it might have looked like a luminous ice block, but more than a dozen frost giants had been concealed in the nearby woods. The casket of the ancient winters. The giants spotted it at once. This was their treasure from Jotunheim. Greed made their eyes hard and wild. Dida was the first to break from the trees, stepping into view as others followed. None of them could stay calm. Loki's face went white. He had baited these giants into Asgard with the ostensible promise of helping them reclaim the casket, hoping they'd make trouble in the palace and draw Thor's wrath toward Jotunheim. He had never meant for the artifact to actually come within their grasp, and yet here it was, as if fate had dropped it at their feet. Hiding behind a tree, Loki's calm facade snapped. When the guards at the rear of the transport team recognized him, he swept into a theatrical outrage. "What are you doing? Why is the casket of the ancient winters out here? Who authorized this?" The guards, simple treasury stewards, hesitated. "His Majesty ordered these gifts sent to the palace. They are presents for the mystic order in Kamartaj." Loki's scowl became genuine. "Gifts? For those mortals? Father has been misled. This artifact cannot be handed to Midgardians." He crouched and reached for the casket. "These items are under my authority. I will return them to the treasury." Hearing Loki's intention to take it back, the frost giants surged from the trees. "That's ours. That's our artifact, Asgardians. Stand aside." Ice axes and frost-tipped arrows streamed from the forest like rain. The guards, armored and armed, were unprepared for blue-skinned warriors to burst from the roadside in Asgard. In moments, some guards were cleaved, others were frozen solid with shafts through their chests. The 5 men in front of Loki fell as if swept by a winter gale. Loki watched helplessly as his hand froze in midair above the casket. A cold front rose behind him, his spine prickled. "You were too quick," he told the giants with a strained smile, trying to recover his stance. "I only tricked them." Once I secure the casket, I will take you all home. He tried to stall, inching his head around to reason with them. Listen, once these guards fall, more will be alerted. We must leave at once. I will lead you. A blue arm shot out, seizing his throat before he could finish. Ice spread from the grip, crackling as it crawled up his neck and across his skin. Loki convulsed once, then fell, frozen stiff. The giants paid him no heed. Their eyes were fixed on the prize. Their leader hoisted the casket high. A brutal wave of cold burst forth like a dam breaking. Trees, stones, even insects were crystallized where the frost raced, the world reflecting a faint, eerie blue. For a heartbeat, there was shocked silence. Then the giants roared in triumph. It's true, the real casket of the ancient winters. They hoisted the treasure and ran for the passage they'd come through. Back to the ship! Back to Jotunheim! The convoy quickly emptied. The ice that had encased Loki began to spiderweb with fractures. It shattered, and Loki's eyes flew open. He was intact, yet his skin where the giant had gripped him was now a pale, icy blue. His eyes, once mischievous and limber, gleamed with an unsettling blood red. Damn it! He scrambled up, but then froze when he caught sight of his hands. The world tilted. Vertigo slammed him as the change in his flesh registered. Frost giant skin, frost giant eyes. The casket had gone, the giants were gone, and the plan he had so carefully woven had slipped from his fingers like water turned to ice. Chapter 290, Odin's New Parenting Plan. Below the divine throne in the heavenly palace, Leon watched the frost giants climb into the ship they'd arrived in and nudged Odin. Loki knows his limits. Huh? Didn't you say you were going to act? Can you start now? He pointed toward the direction the giants had gone. Hurry, your majesty. If you wait too long, they'll already be back in Jotunheim. If that happens, Laufey will come here with the casket of ancient winters and might even poke out what's left of your eye, Leon added dryly. Odin's cheek twitched. This Sorcerer Supreme had no tact at all for a man his age. Lord Leon, what do you think of Thor and Loki? Odin tried to steer the conversation away. I think they're both fine. Whoever becomes the next God King can still lead Asgard to glory. Odin fell silent for a beat, then sighed. Thor has courage and strength, but he hasn't learned responsibility. He looks mature, but he's still an overgrown child. As for Loki, Odin searched for words. Leon cut in with a nod. So Thor's a child, and Loki's someone else's child. Neither suitable, right? Odin choked on the retort. No, Loki needs to grow too. So, aren't you going after those giants? Leon ignored Odin's reflections about Thor and Loki and kept pressing. Lord Leon, this is a good chance for them to gain experience, Odin said earnestly. Leon frowned. You want my help? Yes. You said you'd act yourself. I will act, but if I can't defeat Laufey, I'd like Lord Leon to lend a hand. The Odin, famed across the cosmos, can't handle a Laufey? It's just to avoid mistakes. We are allies, aren't we, Lord Leon? Everything in Asgard can be shared with Kamartaj. Odin genuinely offered Asgard to form an alliance with Kamartaj. Leon was taken aback. A man so iron-willed being so generous was surprising. Then he remembered the truth Odin had known for years. In 9 years, Asgard might be gone anyway, and the offer made grim sense. How do you want to do this? Leon asked. The two tacitly skipped bargaining details. The condition was clear. The alliance would include everything in Asgard. What followed would favor whoever proved stronger. Odin had long held to the old principle of strength supremacy. Age hadn't changed him. Come, Lord Leon. Odin smiled and hauled Leon up the steps to the throne platform. His smile hardened the instant he faced the crowd. He tapped Gungnir lightly on the floor. Thud! Thud! The boisterous, half-drunk assembly fell silent and looked up. Odin radiated sovereign authority. People of Asgard, we stand on the brink of war. He spoke plainly. Unfortunate news. The giants of Jotunheim infiltrated Asgard and stole the casket of ancient winters, a gift intended for our allies. They killed our warriors, gravely wounded Prince Loki, and are now returning to Jotunheim with the casket. Before Odin could finish, Thor smashed his cup and sprang to his feet. Father, how is Loki? He demanded. Odin shook his head. He's alive. His life is not in danger. Thor relaxed for a second, then flared up again. Where are those frost giants? I'll deal with them myself. They must pay. The wine had made Thor's face redder. They want war? We'll give them war. Father, let us invade Jotunheim like you once did. Make them fear Asgard again. At that, the hall erupted. Drunk and roused, Asgardians stood and roared in unison. War! 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 Tony and Banner, tipsy moments ago, went instantly sober watching the fervor. If these people were ready to make Jotunheim tremble today, what would stop them from turning that appetite toward Earth tomorrow? If Leon hadn't given a calm, reassuring look from the throne, Tony might have leapt up and said something sharp to Thor from Earth's point of view. Odin rebuked Thor with a cold voice. Thor, we have a truce with Jotunheim. You must think like a prince, not a warrior. Have you considered what war will bring? You're wrong, father. They killed our people and gravely wounded Loki. If we don't fight, I'm not fit to be king, Thor shouted, pounding a fist against the railing before jumping onto a chair. I will return with victory. Odin watched him without expression and then, after a long breath, waved a weary hand. Very well, take who you will. Go catch the frost giants, reclaim the casket of ancient winters, and do what you must. Really? Really? This is perfect. Father, I love you, Thor cried, raising Mjolnir. Everyone, come with me. By Mjolnir, I will lead you to victory. A band of warriors cheered, slapped shoulders, and formed up around Thor as if this were a hunting trip rather than a war. They even invited Tony and Banner. In short order, the great hall had emptied, leaving only the Camartage party, Odin, and a few women. Leon and Odin stood shoulder to shoulder, watching the departing force. This is reckless. Are you sure they'll lose? Leon asked. Whether they win or lose, Thor will pay a price, Odin said, eyes lowered. It's necessary for his growth. Leon was speechless. Odin was willing to risk Asgardian lives as a crucible to force Thor to grow, ruthless and pragmatic to the end. Tony wandered over, curious. You two look odd. Any secret plan? It's His Majesty's brilliant parenting plan. Nothing to do with me, Leon said, spreading his hands. Odin inclined his head toward Tony. Thank you for informing me of the future, young man. Perhaps I made mistakes in the past, which led Thor and Loki to this point. I only adjusted a few things. Tony suddenly understood. The knowledge of the future had changed Odin's mind. No wonder old Captain America had left this war out when recounting things. He noticed Leon and Odin were still staring into the distance. What are you looking at? He asked. Thor swinging Mjolnir, Leon said. Want to see? Leon tapped his temple and cast an improved version of the pensieve from the wizarding world, projecting the scene he'd been watching so the Camartage members could share it. Chapter 291, Laufey the Frost Giant. The scene several kilometers away unfolded in everyone's minds. Thor, leading dozens of warriors, was already in pursuit of the frost giants. The entire Asgardian army was rapidly mobilizing, ready to provide support at a moment's notice. Leon's gaze tracked Thor's movements as everyone watched, the Thunderer swinging Mjolnir and soaring into the sky. He charged alone, leaving his men behind. He's actually going to take on the frost giants by himself? Not the smartest move. Reckless could mean worse, Tony muttered, arms crossed, offering his assessment. He leaned toward Leon. No wonder old Captain America said Thor would be exiled to Earth in the future. The guy must have caused a lot of trouble. Leon chuckled. Tony, you're the last person who should be throwing stones. You've caused your share of trouble. What? You saying I'm a mess too? Aren't you? Leon spread his hands. I think most people would agree. Leon, Odin intervened, cutting off their whispering. If you don't mind, let's keep future talk to a minimum, especially concerning Thor and Loki. Tony and Leon exchanged glances. Leon nodded at Tony to speak, and Tony lowered his voice. He hadn't told anyone this before, and likely wouldn't again. If Pepper ever learned he would one day save the universe by snapping his fingers and sacrifice himself, Tony shuddered at the fallout. Meanwhile, unaware that Odin had arranged much of what was happening, Thor finally caught up to the frost giants. Their ships were descending toward a spatial portal. Thor dove in with a roar, lightning arcing from him to pierce a ship. Flames followed the crash, and when the ship burst, the casket of ancient winters erupted with cold air, freezing the mountains around it. More than a dozen frost giants fought back, but they couldn't control the casket perfectly. After a few brutal exchanges, 3 giants lay dead. The leading giant realized they were beaten. He grabbed the casket and surged toward the cave, concealing the spatial portal. He could barely keep Thor at bay with the casket's power, no chance of escape. He shoved a tribesman aside with one arm. Go, return to Jotunheim. Tell the king we've seized the casket of ancient winters. Bring word. Send support." One giant fled through the portal toward Jotunheim. Thor barely took notice. He had decided, after reclaiming the casket, he would lead his army to crush Jotunheim. He shattered incoming ice blades with blow after blow. Even though the cold from the casket slowed him, he was confident he could handle the handful left before him. One by one, the frost giants fell. When only the giant clutching the casket remained, bloodied and barely standing, Thor, breathing hard, smelling faintly of alcohol, tossed Mjolnir in his hand. "You fought well," Thor said. "You don't control that casket yet, but you're a commendable warrior." "I'm sorry," he added with a grin. "I still have to finish you, and then I'll be going to Jotunheim." In Asgardian children's tales, the people of Jotunheim were the terrifying frost giants, used to hush crying children into silence. Thor threw Mjolnir like a streak of lightning. Despairing, the giant unleashed the casket's full power. Layer upon layer of ice walls shot up, but Mjolnir smashed through each as an unstoppable meteor. It struck the giant's chest, sending him flying. The casket was flung away. Thor steadied his hand and caught Mjolnir as it returned. "It's over," he laughed, then rested a few minutes. He glanced toward the center of the divine realm. The reinforcements were still a third of the way out. Their sleek ships were far off. "They're slow," he murmured. "My strength is fine. It's not that I've gotten weaker. It's those mages from Kamartaj. Abnormal." The three top mages who had arrived from Kamartaj that day had been nothing to scoff at, not to mention an even stronger sorcerer supreme. Thor had found himself doubting for a moment. Fortunately, these frost giants, mere bogeymen in Asgardian stories, weren't a match for him, and that steadied his confidence. "Good," he said. "When Vandal and the others join us, we'll march on Jotunheim together." He planned to use the spatial portal to reach Jotunheim, mirroring how the frost giants had traveled. He didn't even think of the Bifrost Bridge, a far easier route. "First, let's retrieve the casket." Turning to collect his prize, Thor froze. On the previously frozen, empty slope, 40 or 50 living frost giants had appeared out of nowhere, standing behind the giant holding the casket. Around him lay more than a dozen corpses, already cold. The giant bent, closing the eyes of each fallen comrade. Thor stared, unsettled. As his attention wavered, reinforcements had already passed through the portal into Asgard, and they had taken the time to gather their dead. "You are Laufey?" Thor heard himself ask the giant holding the casket. Something like a hammer rang in his head, warning him that the situation had just turned serious. The frost giant did not deny the name, but he didn't answer immediately. He rose slowly, eyes lifting from the corpses. When he finally looked up, his gaze was ferocious, like a being clawing his way from a mountain of corpses and a sea of blood. "Asgardian," Laufey intoned, his voice low and worn like an old bellows. "Are you ready for death?" The moment the words fell, the casket of ancient winters roared to life under Laufey's control. Unlike the previous wielder, Laufey unleashed the casket's power in full. Cold erupted outward. Wherever it reached, matter itself seemed to stop. Even molecules slowed. Thor reacted without hesitation, swinging Mjolnir. "I am Thor Odinson, Frost Giants. You will pay for your invasion," he thundered, and Mjolnir carried him like lightning, tearing through solid ice toward Laufey. In the next instant, Thor was encased in a sheath of ice, frozen solid, an ice statue clutched around Mjolnir. Some frost giants surged forward, eager to kill Thor in revenge. But Laufey stopped them with a raised hand. "Stop," he commanded. "He is Odin's son. Our goal is to break Asgard's hold, not to spill blood for blood's sake." Around them, the cold from the casket crept on, and Asgard's forces watched, stunned as the leader of the frost giants stood in their realm, the casket blazing at his feet, and the son of Odin frozen where he had last struck. Chapter 292. Asgard is over. Laufey knew Odin's strength. The older the Asgardian gods grew, the stronger they became. Odin was old, but not yet dead. If the thunder god Thor were killed, Laufey did not believe his forces could stand against Odin's wrath. He could not have defeated Odin in his prime, much less the All-Father now. But as long as the Prince of Asgard lived, the chance Odin would take the field was greatly reduced. Laufey swore that today Asgard would taste the slaughter Jotunheim once endured. "Let's go. Welcome our warriors," he barked. He carried the casket of ancient winters. Frost spread from his feet. Within breaths, the land around them, hills, forests, the sea, was glazed in biting ice. This was the casket's true power. It could freeze a world, unleash storms that would devastate a planet. Laufey guided the ice beneath him like a carriage, the frost giants behind him, and Thor, frozen solid, borne along toward the Bifrost control terminal. Wherever they crossed the ocean, millions of tons of seawater became instant ice. Their route left no cover. The Asgardian defenders racing to intercept saw the procession from afar. At its front was Thor, captured and frozen. The warriors Three and Sif, aboard their ship, went white. They sent urgent word to Odin and ordered the fleet to surround the frost giants. The Asgardian armada closed in, ready to demand Thor's return or strike. Laufey only glanced at them. A blast of cold erupted from the casket. Whole squadrons of ships were wrapped in a sudden freeze and turned into airborne ice floes. Their power failed. They fell from the sky and smashed onto the frozen sea. Wreckage and severed limbs lay encased in ice. In one stroke, fully armed Asgardian warriors were wiped out. Thor was trapped in the ice, unable even to blink. He could only watch as his companions died. His body radiated a terrible cold, yet inside him it felt as if a torch burned, fire scorching from skin down to bone. He found a perverse relief in not seeing Vandal or the others in the ruins. Laufey watched Thor's agony and sneered. So this Thor is only a child playing at lordship, ignorant of war. Odin's teaching of his son is no match for his eldest daughter's education, he spat. Then he waved his hand. The ice beneath them quickened, carrying them toward the Bifrost terminal. With the casket, Laufey was unstoppable. Heimdall, guardian of the Bifrost, was frozen with ease. Laufey took Heimdall's long sword, the key to the bridge, and used it to open the passage. Activate the Bifrost. Summon our army. Jotunheim declared invasion. Under Laufey's command, giant legions spanning star systems poured through the bridge into the divine realm. Frost beasts led the assault and drove deep into Asgard's defensive lines. With the caskets cold, Jotunheim's forces were nearly irresistible. Death trailed their advance. Asgard's ranks fell without respite. Loki, who had come to the front, could hardly believe what he saw. One of his schemes had set this in motion. Casualties mounted, and he had no answer. Only Father could fix this, he thought, and he scrambled toward the heavenly palace to tell Odin the situation. Behind the frost giants, Thor's grief and rage were even deeper than Loki's anxiety. He cursed his own rashness. If he had not slaughtered those dozen frost giants, perhaps Laufey would have taken the casket and left. He loathed his weakness. If he were stronger, he could have broken the ice and joined the fight. Lightning, barely perceptible, started to crawl through his flesh. Mjolnir, frozen aside, quivered. But without Odin's guidance, Thor, the thunder god, still lacked the power to free himself. As Asgard's losses grew, despair spread. Then Odin's voice boomed across the divine realm. Enough, Laufey. A rainbow tore the frost-streaked sky. Odin rode an 8-legged steed, Gungnir in hand, and in an instant he stood over the coast. His presence radiated an authority none could contest. Every frost giant halted. All eyes turned to the God King, All-Father. Laufey lowered the casket slightly, fixing his gaze on Odin. Where others saw only inviolable majesty, Laufey saw something else, undisguised fatigue carved into the old god's face. Your condition does not seem good, All-Father, Laufey said, tone edged with satisfaction and curiosity. With the casket in hand, it was hard for him to resist testing Odin. Odin looked down. Stop, Laufey. This began as a child's prank. Let no more lives be shed. Everyone assumed Laufey had been enraged by Thor, including Thor himself. But Odin and Laufey both knew the real culprit, Loki. The trick Loki played, luring the frost giants into Asgard, had brought all this devastation. What if I say no? Laufey could not contain himself. He raised the casket and shot a torrent of blue cold into the sky, a rime that froze sea and air aimed straight at Odin. Odin snorted, lifting Gungnir. Come then. Gungnir's shaft flared with a hard, rainbow light. The two streams, one of biting winter, one of ancient divine power, collided above the sea. The world shook. The causeway to the Bifrost terminal cracked and crumbled under the force. Soldiers and frost giants on the bridge tumbled into the ocean and were swept out with the currents toward the edge of the world. This was a clash of skyfathers. One impact nearly sundered the realm. For a moment, everyone believed Asgard would be annihilated. Then Odin began to pant. His right hand, once so steady, started to loosen. A weak, breathy sound escaped him, an old man struggling under a load far too heavy for his failing body. Gungnir slipped from his grasp. The torrent from the casket struck him full. Odin was sealed in ice, turning rigid and silent, and fell from the sky with a thunderous splash into the sea. That sight struck every Asgardian like a death knell. The All-Father, frozen and fallen, the symbol of their world shattered. Asgard was finished. Chapter 293, extinguished before it could ignite. "No, Father! Don't! No!" Thor's roar was a frozen, disbelieving wail. He wanted to deny what his eyes showed him, but Odin's majestic figure was gone from the sky. The aging All-Father had been struck down and toppled into the sea. In that moment, Thor understood clearly. His father was old. He was no longer the man who would always clean up Thor's messes, no matter how reckless his son was. Father, he was defeated. Loki collapsed to the ground before the heavenly palace, utterly broken. For him, the pain ran deeper than Thor's. He felt like the cause of all this, carrying both the confusion of his identity and furious resentment toward Odin for hiding the truth. Seeing Odin fall filled him with bewilderment and a burning hatred for the frost giants. Inside the palace, Leon could not keep his composure either. Odin? No. How can that old man be such a good actor, like the Ancient One? He muttered in disbelief. Had these ageless beings spent centuries perfecting their performances? At the Bifrost control terminal, Laufey still held the casket of ancient winters aloft. The cold pouring from it, enough to freeze whole worlds, continued to slice into the sky after toppling Odin. A blast of frigid air erupted and began to crystallize everything. Clouds, dust, and vapor turned to ice and fell, and a blizzard of glittering shards swept over the divine realm. Tiny crystals stung Laufey's face as he stared at the place where Odin had fallen into the sea. All-Father. No, Odin is defeated. He's defeated. Ha-ha! He's defeated! Laufey's sternness dissolved into triumph. 1,000 years, 1,000 years, he cried, laughing as the ice rain lashed him. Asgard, Odin, let's finish this today. With no need to hold back, he poured the full fury of the casket into the air. A river of cold surged outward from it, beginning at his feet. The ocean around Asgard began to freeze inch by inch. Those Asgardian warriors who had fallen into the sea were sealed in ice, life draining from them in the lethal cold. Above, the sky filled with blue-tinged crystals. Below, the land was turning to ice. The world was being transformed into a second Jotunheim. The Asgardians fought bravely to the last, but against the inexorable tide of cold, none could survive. Thor was trapped in solid ice, his eyes bloodshot with fury and grief. He realized with crushing clarity that after his father's fall, he was Asgard's last hope. Yet he could do nothing but watch as his people froze. Something in Thor snapped. Lightning flickered across his body, and Mjolnir, entombed in ice, began to tremble. The sky brightened with a flash of electricity, then serpents of lightning tore through the falling crystals. The blue of the frozen sky darkened toward black. Laufey looked up, annoyed by the shift in weather, then turned his gaze to the ice-encased Thor. "I almost forgot about you, you foolish brute." He stepped closer. Fine cracks had begun to spiderweb through the ice around Thor. It looked as if he might break free. "Because of Odin, I only trapped you," Laufey said. "But now Odin is going to Valhalla, Asgardian. Why don't you go there ahead of him and prepare a welcome feast?" He leveled the casket and unleashed another roaring current of cold. The already frozen Thor was sealed into a perfect ice statue. He had been on the verge of fighting back, but Laufey's spell snuffed that spark. Inside the heavenly palace, everyone watching through Leon's magic was stunned into silence. "My Thor, no!" Queen Frigga cried, covering her mouth, tears welling. Only she and the Camartage contingent remained in the hall. Earlier, when Odin fell, Wanda and Pietro nearly rushed out to intervene. The siblings were young and primed for justice, but Leon had grabbed them. He'd insisted this was a ploy Odin had staged to train his children, and that Odin himself had taken the brunt of the casket's attack. If Odin had truly fought, he might be frozen now, slipping toward the Odin sleep. "Leon, sir, please, can you move? I'm afraid Thor will." Frigga's voice trembled. She was a Vanaheim goddess, but she still grieved for the warriors sacrificed by Odin's harsh plans. He had once sacrificed the Valkyries to defeat Hela. Now he had again thrown lives away to force his sons to grow. Don't worry, Queen Frigga, Leon said, meeting her pleading eyes. Thor and Loki will mature from this. I'll act. He rose into the air. His magic suit flowed and refitted itself into a tighter, battle-ready form, the familiar Dormammu suit. It's a pity, he added. I saw Thor was about to unleash something greater, but Laufey cut him off. It's fine, Frigga said, shaking her head. If Thor comes out of this stronger, Odin will be satisfied. Leon paused at the thought. Thor's maturity would be a strange kind of victory. Everyone, wait here. I'm going to see what's happening, Leon said and flew out of the hall. I'm coming too, Tony said, his armor already attaching as he lunged after Leon, only to be hurled backward in a blur by Leon's magic. The others exchanged looks and chose to remain in the hall, waiting and watching as the fate of Asgard unfolded. Chapter 294, Defeated in One Blow. Leon finally appeared. Inside the frozen sea, Odin, eyes tightly shut, let out a long, relieved breath. He was already half submerged in Odin's sleep. In that state, his divine power would recover, his wounds would knit, and his life would be prolonged. Even with his eyes closed, he could still perceive everything happening outside. If Leon had gone back on his word and not intervened, Odin would have had to risk his remaining life to deal with Laufey. The old god had little desire to waste what little time he had left on a blue-skinned ice king. By now, a tenth of Asgard had already frozen over. Laufey led his army across the ice as if he were already on home turf. He had never felt so elated. His most powerful enemy lay fallen. Odin's son was frozen and near death. Laufey could think of no reason for his miraculous success. He didn't care why he had won or why Odin had suddenly seemed so frail he could hardly hold a spear, only that he had won. No one could stop him now. So I am Ragnarok. So this is what Ragnarok looks like, Laufey proclaimed. He stood on an ice peak he had wrought, holding the casket of ancient winters in one hand and conjuring a great ice sword with the other, pointing it at the halls of Asgard, overflowing with ambition. I am invincible. I am eternity. From this day forward, I will be the master of the 9 realms, and the frost giants will rule them again. Below the peak, tens of thousands of crimson eyes watched him. The hearts of the frost giants beat faster with pride. Leon floated above, looking down at the exultant king. He wanted to retort, who dares to call himself invincible? Odin isn't even old, yet the words died on his tongue. Instead, he said casually, letting his voice drop across the ice. Nice night. Even the sea view isn't bad. Laufey, you've made good use of that casket of ancient winters. The air filled with starlight-dusted ice crystals that trembled at his voice. The falling sleet quickened. On the ice peak, Laufey looked up and saw Leon's figure framed in the night through the ice rain. The figure fell like a meteor, but without disturbing the world, more like a fish sliding through space than an object rushing through the air. Who are you? Laufey demanded. He recognized a powerful opponent, but was not afraid. With the casket in hand, he believed only a prime Odin could defeat him. I am the Sorcerer Supreme of Midgard, Laufey, Leon said. As Odin told you, leave. The title of Master of the 9 Realms does not belong to Jotunheim. Leon landed less than 100 meters from Laufey. The giant's victorious face darkened. You intend to stop me? Are you one of Odin's lackeys? Something like that. Leon's tone was flat. By the way, that casket of ancient winters was entrusted to me by Odin. Don't forget to leave it when you go. Laufey laughed in fury. The casket belongs to Jotunheim. That bandit Odin has no right to claim it. You come from Midgard? Fine, Midgard will be mine after Asgard. Midgard was, in Laufey's view, the most backward of the 9 realms, worse than Jotunheim itself. He had no desire to debate. He activated the casket and unleashed a beam of freezing energy. Even Odin had been undone by that attack. Using it against a mere Midgardian felt almost indulgent to Laufey. The ice-blue ray cleaved through the air like a string of crystalline spikes, heading straight for Leon. Not bad, Leon commented as he faced it. The temperature is very low, close to absolute zero. In his eyes, the casket's trump card slowed, became almost like a frozen still image. It is indeed a formidable divine artifact, Leon thought, considering that after this fight he ought to send a clone to study the casket. Perhaps he could learn an ice law from it. Then let's do this. He did not dodge. Asgard was behind him. There was nowhere to fall back to, and he did not need to. His peaceful black eyes flared crimson, and suddenly cracked open like twin suns. Two scarlet beams erupted from him and drove straight into the oncoming ice-blue torrent. There was no thunderous collision, no spectacle like the one when Odin had countered Laufey. Leon's heat rays met the casket's energy and pushed through, swallowing it, and then rushed toward Laufey. Laufey, with the casket in hand, was a Skyfather-level powerhouse, capable of planetary destruction. But gods differ in scale, the way stars differ from planets. The gap between Leon and Laufey at that moment was astronomical. "No, this can't be. What is this? How? How could my casket of ancient winters?" Laufey's cry cut off as the two crimson rays instantly shredded his beam. Before he could move from certainty to confusion, he was engulfed by the searing light and turned to ash. The casket slipped from his dying grip and fell. Leon appeared where Laufey had stood and caught the casket as it clattered down. He smiled, feeling its terrible power briefly, then turned his crimson eyes across the ice. "The rest of you frost giants can go home," he said coldly. "Heimdall might be kind enough to give you a ride." At that gaze, the surrounding frost giants stepped back in unison. It took them a few seconds to understand what had happened. King Laufey! The king is dead, killed by a Midgardian." From the moment he launched his counterattack to the moment Laufey was killed, Leon had taken less than a second. The frost giants had blinked, and their king was gone. Stunned, terrified, they could barely breathe. Loki, slumped outside the heavenly palace, was wordless. Thor, slowly freezing and losing strength, stared as if he could not believe it. The mortals who had gathered on the palace terrace to watch the battle blinked, still trying to process it. Wanda rubbed her arms, cheeks puffed against the cold. She leaned toward Pietro and whispered, "His eyes are terrifying when they turn red. He's so much better when he's usually quiet." She still remembered the first time she had seen those crimson eyes, afraid, fascinated, drawn to the strange security and the rush of excitement they gave her. Chapter 295, Odin's Play. Laufey's death did little to deter the frost giants. Maybe he had died too carelessly, or maybe the taste of recent victory made them unwilling to give up their dream of ruling the 9 realms. None of the frost giants around Leon intended to leave. They glared at him with red eyes filled with hatred. "Midgardian, you killed our king. You must pay," a tall frost giant roared. Others answered in kind, and the anger spread like wildfire. More and more eyes focused on Leon. They were ready for battle, just waiting for someone to make the first move so they could swarm him. Leon toyed with the casket of ancient winters in his hand, and without looking up, said, "You'd better think this through. If you want Jotunheim to survive the next few decades, don't make a move." His warning gave some of them pause. In the end, though, one warrior charged from the crowd, shouting of vengeance and revival, his weapon slashing toward Leon. That act signaled the charge. Tens of thousands of frost giants surged forward like a tide. In an ordinary war, that many attackers could have cut Leon to pieces, but they were facing a Skyfather-level powerhouse. Leon raised his right hand and slowly closed his fingers. Violent spatial fluctuations rippled through the charging ranks. The space around them distorted. In an instant, tens of thousands of small black holes appeared and vanished, leaving the battlefield space smooth and undisturbed, except that the frost giants were gone. They had been sucked into those ruptures in space, their bodies torn apart by gravity. It was a straightforward application of spatial rules, an effect not unlike the movie scene where Thanos used the Space Stone against Doctor Strange, except these frost giants had no one and nothing that could stop it. The ice plain, once crowded, cleared in an instant. Only a few scattered frost giants who had not joined the charge remained. Leon had let them live. One moment they had been pleading with their comrades to hold back, the next their companions had disappeared. A cold wind swept over the ice. Even these beings, born to freeze and endure, felt a chill crawl through them from the heart outward. Monster, the one who killed King Laufey, was a monster. Horror made the survivors rigid. When Leon pointed toward the Bifrost terminal in the distance and told them to wait there for Odin's orders, they scrambled away, crawling and shoving to get to safety. Jotunheim was finished, they thought. All they could picture was ruin. Leon raised an eyebrow and slipped the casket of ancient winters into his world. He didn't know precisely how Odin would handle the two princes next, but there would be measures to pacify rebellion across the Nine Realms. After all, many Asgardians had died in this war. Even with Laufey dead, the consequences were real. The Nine Realms might have been on the verge of chaos. But now, tens of thousands of frost giants had been wiped out in a single move. That kind of turn might make those with ambitions elsewhere think twice, unless they tried to contact Kamartaj and invited Leon to lead a new rebellion. If that happened, opening a magic academy could be timely. He could recruit talented students from across the realms. His thoughts drifted toward the idea of an academy as he slowly rose into the air, eyes glowing red. He activated heat vision again, this time aimed downward at the frozen sea and the Asgardian warriors entombed in ice. Heat vision spread in a broad fan, its temperature carefully controlled. The frozen ocean began to thaw, steam rising where ice and heat met. The top layer melted into warm currents, the lower ice followed. In less than 2 minutes, the sea churned with waves. Leon's blacklight clone stepped out of his world, splitting into thousands of tentacles that plunged into the water and hauled the Asgardian warriors free. At the same time, it collected valuable biological samples, genes and the like. Even Odin and Thor, just coming out of the cold, were caught in those tentacles and had a mouthful of blood drawn. Odin noticed the small action and frowned slightly, but he did not resist. His entire appearance had been that of a dying old man, pale and weak, playing a role so convincingly that he couldn't be expected to move. "Father! Father!" Thor rushed over as soon as he thawed, grateful and emotional. He hurried to Odin's side. The surviving Asgardian warriors carried Odin to the shore and placed him in sunlight. Around him people gathered, faces full of sorrow. Leon stood back with his arms folded, observing. He appreciated the efficiency. They had brought Odin to the shoreline immediately. Asgardian funerals were much like the Viking ship burials on Earth. The dead placed on an ornate wooden boat with their weapons and ornaments, set adrift and burned, the flames consuming their past and preserving their memory. If Odin had actually died here, Leon thought, they could have launched him on a drifting boat right away. No fuss, no delay. Fortunately, Odin was not truly dying. His pallor was part of the act. If it weren't so, even holding the casket of ancient winters might not have protected Laufey. Odin could have ended him easily. At worst, he might have been worn down by divine exertion and gone to Valhalla early. Frigga arrived at the shore with Loki shortly thereafter. Odin opened his eyes weakly, barely lifting his lids as if it took all his strength. "Children, children," he murmured, reaching out with difficulty. Thor, tears and snot running down his face, practically sobbed, "Father, you're awake. I knew you wouldn't die. You're Odin." He moved to take one of his father's hands. Loki crouched on the other side, his expression complex. He had many questions, but this was not the time. Odin's fingers closed around both of their hands with effort. "Father, how do you feel?" "We'll take you back to the Hall of the Aesir for treatment right away," Thor insisted, voice trembling with relief and concern. Chapter 296, Thor becomes acting all-father. Loki is banished. "No, it's unnecessary, Thor. I know my condition." Odin forced out. "I'm about to enter the Odin's Leap, Thor," he continued. I have always taught you to have the patience of a king. Do you understand?" "I understand, Father. I understand everything now. It was my fault. If not for me, Laufey wouldn't have invaded Asgard." Thor wept. Loki bowed his head beside him, his own eyes dimmed. Odin managed a faint, satisfied smile. "Thor, after I fall into slumber, Asgard will be entrusted to you. Remember, recklessness is no kingly trait. You must think for every citizen of Asgard and for the lives of the Nine Realms." "Father," Thor reached to promise something, but Odin cut him off with a raised hand. "Now, in the name of my ancestors, the previous All-Fathers, and myself, Odin, All-Father, I hereby appoint Thor Odinson to temporarily oversee all affairs of Asgard and the Nine Realms. From now on, Asgard and Kamartaj are our closest allies. Everything Asgard possesses shall be shared with our allies." Odin glanced at Lion in the distance, satisfied that matters had been settled. Then Loki sprang to his feet, jaw clenched, staring at Odin. "What about me?" he demanded. "You're making Thor acting all-father. What arrangements are there for me?" Odin looked deep into Loki's eyes and gripped his son's hand. His voice sharpened. "Loki, you lured the frost giants to Asgard and caused this devastation. You have failed Asgard. Countless innocent lives across the 9 realms may die because of you. My son Loki, your sins are grave. I want you to go to Midgard and repent as a mortal." "What? A mortal?" Loki's eyes widened. Odin squeezed hard enough that Loki flinched. Though weak and near sleep, Odin's grip was iron. "Loki, I now strip you of your magic." A steely edge had entered Odin's voice. "Only when you find true compassion and sincerity may you regain the power of Loki." A green light flared around Loki and then faded. He felt power drain away. He was suddenly powerless, mortal. Odin released him. Loki stumbled backwards and fell, stunned and blank-eyed. "Father!" Thor rushed to help Loki up and to argue with Odin, but Odin pointed at him. "Stand there!" Thor froze. "Thor, you will send Loki to Midgard and watch over him, urging him to change." Yes, father." Thor lowered his head. "Very good," Odin nodded, satisfied. Loki, still on the ground, broke into a hysterical laugh. "Father, did you know that when I was frozen by the frost giants, I took on their appearance?" Loki looked up, his eyes rimmed red. "Are you saying I'm under some curse?" Odin was quiet for a moment. "Of course not." "Then who am I?" "You are the Prince of Asgard, the son of Odin." Odin's gaze flickered as he understood where Loki was heading. "Heh, is that so? I came from Jotunheim with the casket of ancient winters." Loki's voice trembled. "I found Laufey's child there. He was pitiful and helpless. I thought he might be the key to lasting peace between Asgard and Jotunheim, so I brought him back." "So Laufey's child, so that's how it was," Odin admitted, the words falling out in a halting confession. Loki rose, distraught, tears spilling down his face. "So you used me. I'm just a weapon in your vault, something to be kept and used. You never loved me, did you?" "Did you not?" he shouted suddenly at Odin. "You favor Thor. The throne is his, the praise is his, the recognition is his." Loki stepped closer, nearly in Odin's face. "And I'm just some monster from a bedtime story. You'll never let me sit on the throne." "No, Loki." Odin's voice broke as he tried to protest. Odin weakly pushed Loki away with trembling hands, then clutched his chest. His eyes widened and he slumped. He had fallen into the Odin's leap. Loki's crazed expression froze into helplessness. He called, "Father, father!" Thor hurried to Odin and found him unresponsive. "Look at what you've done, Loki," Thor started, anger flaring instinctively. But he stopped when he saw Loki's vacant eyes. All the words died in his throat. "Loki, even if everything Father said is true, you are still my brother." Thor put a hand on Loki's shoulder, then lifted Odin and carried him toward the palace. Queen Frigga followed and hugged Loki, murmuring that a mother's love endures. She then organized the warriors to clean up the devastation. The people from Kamartaj who had witnessed the royal drama pitched in as well. Wong and Banner used healing and repair spells on the injured and the ruins. But nothing compared to Lion and Wanda. Lion, using the reality stone he had been entrusted with, waved his hand and restored collapsed buildings to their original state. Wanda, wielding chaos magic, rebuilt the shattered Bifrost from the sea. Aside from the heavy losses among the soldiers, Asgard was restored to its former appearance. The warriors Three and Sif had survived, fortunate not to have died when the ship was frozen. A few hours later, Thor, resplendent in his armor, and the Asgardian warriors bid farewell to Lion's group. Lion had already been given the eternal flame and the Eye of Agamotto, as Odin had promised. Because Odin had stipulated that Asgard's possessions should be shared with allies, Thor also handed over copies of Asgardian spellbooks and some Uru metal. Uru is a rare, powerful metal. Mjolnir itself was forged from it in a dying star, and even Asgard's supply was limited. At the massive portal, Tony waved. "We're leaving, Thor. Be a good all-father. If you can't handle the rebellion in the 9 realms, call. I'll be there." Thor swung Mjolnir in salute. "Ha, I'll even beat you next time, Iron Man." He turned to Lion. "Sorcerer Supreme, I leave Loki in your care." "Don't worry, he'll be well looked after at Kamartaj," Lion replied. Loki had originally been slated to wander Midgard, but Wong, noting the Academy's shortage of teachers, invited him to stay. Lion agreed. Having seen a glimpse of Loki's power, he judged the sacred place could keep things in check. Still, Lion suspected Odin had orchestrated much of this, old, cunning plans at work. With farewells said, the group stepped into the portal. "It's finally over. This Christmas has been one for the books," someone muttered. The portal snapped shut. Tony was immediately swept up by Pepper, who had been worried the whole time. What's all this exciting drama? Were you hurt? Come on, let me check you. She wrapped him up, and with a burst of colorful photon energy, they disappeared into the sky. Everyone exchanged looks, then laughed and went back to their lives. Banner with Betty, Wong with Sarah, Lion heading home with Natasha and Shirley. Chapter 297. It's 2009. A scheduled battle with Asgard didn't change their lives. After returning to everyday routines, old Wong kept working on his academy plan. Mordo kept the Holy Land running, and Banner focused on expanding his magical animal farming business. Old Wong gave Banner a clear directive. Before the Supreme Mage Academy opened, Banner had to raise enough giant magical animals so that every apprentice enrolling would be assigned a magical companion, one apiece. Only that, Old Wang insisted, would demonstrate Kamartaj's deep heritage as a mage sanctuary passed down since ancient times. Banner adjusted his glasses and wondered, privately, that Kamartaj hadn't seemed to have magical animals before. How could it be a heritage now? As for Loki, the prince had been fragile when he first arrived on Earth. Mordo thought exposure to magical animals would calm him, so he sent Loki to spend time with Banner. But Banner had to let the Hulk out occasionally to let off steam, and every time Hulk erupted, Loki, the psychologically scarred former god, would tremble and try to flee. The encounter only deepened the shadow over the already fragile prince. One night at dinner, Loki, in a moment of mischief and desperate to escape his anxiety, maliciously tried to coax Banner into eliminating the Hulk. Banner hesitated and warned him it was a bad idea. Loki was still arguing when Banner suddenly transformed. The Hulk roared, overturned the dining table, snatched Loki, and began swinging him wildly. Mortal Loki couldn't withstand such punishment. If Banner hadn't reacted immediately, using a practiced star projection to eject the Hulk, then collapsing to his knees, holding Loki and casting frantic healing spells while begging him not to die, Loki might not have seen the next sunrise at Kamartaj. After that, whenever Loki saw Banner, he would press his face to Banner's chest for a heartbeat, then hurry away. Watching Loki's composure unravel day by day troubled Mordo. Loki had been banished and then adopted. He was still, by blood, an Asgardian prince. Thor had even said he might come to Earth to check on his brother. Puzzled and uneasy, Mordo reported the situation to Leon, the Sorcerer Supreme, leaving the final decision to him. When Mordo came to report, Leon was in the middle of listening to Yelena's pitch. The unlucky young woman wanted permission to film a sequel, Superman and Iron Man Rescuing Asgard. She'd already come up with the title and written the script. Tony had made a few edits, though Leon noticed Iron Man, ostensibly a minor supporting character, seemed to have more screen time than the protagonist. He was about to send it back when Mordo's report arrived. Leon waved Yelena off and told her to film Thor 1. Copy the previous world's movie plot directly, he said. Let Loki star. Let the film help him live out his dream of being God King. Half a month later, Leon stopped paying much attention to the superhero company. Yelena still complained at home. Loki was being a diva and changing the script. Thor 1 was nearly becoming The Legend of Loki the God King. Leon only shrugged. Since Loki was already a loser in reality, let him have his fantasy. After an exciting Christmas, everyone settled into a peaceful New Year. Time slid into February 2009. Tony still looked occasionally haggard. Pepper had her radiant moments. Wanda signed with the superhero company and became a street hero in New York. In the early nights of the year, she shut down almost all of Kingpin's illegal operations in Hell's Kitchen. If Natasha hadn't stopped her, arguing that New York's underworld needed a balance that Kingpin provided, Wanda might have uprooted him entirely. Pietro grumbled at home, wishing he'd thought of taking down Kingpin first. He imagined the endorsements he'd have gotten. Leon no longer spent all his time immersed in cultivation. By day, he sometimes accompanied Wanda and Spider-Gwen from the neighboring Spider-Verse on shopping trips. By night, he helped Natasha and Yelena with physical training. He even traveled into the biochemical universe to train with Jill and Ada Wong. 5 years had passed since the end of the world in that universe. Order and peace had been restored. Every time Leon visited, he jumped back in the timeline to when he'd last left. So for Jill and Ada, Leon had, in effect, never left. One cold day, Leon sat cross-legged on the rooftop of his Brooklyn home. Snow blanketed New York. Flakes slipped off him as if aware of his presence and fell to the ground. He faced the sun, feeling its warmth, and thought to himself, I've reached the limit of the World Master realm. Next, I need to fully comprehend a law to break through to immortality. He reflected on his progress. I can't grow stronger simply by continuing the same cultivation. I can still enhance my physical strength by bathing in the sun, but I need breakthroughs elsewhere too. My understanding of the law of light is almost halfway. Time and space, I've grasped about a third of the way. I've started Ice and Fire with help from the Casket of Ancient Winters and the Eternal Flame, and I've initiated the law of soul. It'll take at least another half year to reach immortality. And while I'm in the World Master stage, I can place infinity stones inside my inner world to study them, zero-distance contact with the origins of the cosmos. That kind of progress is miraculous. Once I reach immortality, I won't have those conditions anymore, so it's best to remain at World Master a bit longer. I might be able to master time and space fully in about 2 years. Then I could potentially cross immortality straight to Law Venerable, or even Law Master. Related secondary settings are in Chapter 166. He also thought about the empty slot he still had for a third clone. My main body carries Kryptonian blood. The first, my Blood Sea clone, serves as an energy reserve. The second, the Black Light clone, acts as a genetic analyzer and virus. Both are invaluable. The third clone should assist the main body in becoming stronger. Superman's most absurd and powerful trait is his idealistic power. It can't be fully analyzed. If I could create a clone with idealistic power, it might help me tap into that force. Leon continued, plotting possibilities. It would be ideal if the clone could help me comprehend laws, and if it possessed characteristics close to the universe itself. Also, it should be a different race. Main body has Kryptonian blood. The Blood Sea clone can transform into a giant or a vast sea, and the Black Light is a virus, so the third should be an energy type. He ran the idea through his omnipotent travel ability. Is there any being across the worlds that's an energy life form, idealistic in nature and cosmically attuned? In any case, I'll try the omnipotent traversing ability. Start worlds, keywords energy life, idealistic, close to the universe, third clone, low threat. Starting retrieval, world anchoring successful, energy required, travel confirmed. Chapter 298, Legid Duo. That familiar sensation returned. The tug as part of his energy was pulled away. Leon left the Marvel Universe. After crossing another thin world membrane, he arrived in the target universe. There actually are beings that can meet such stringent conditions, he thought. A floating, weightless feeling told him he was in the universe. He opened his eyes. Before him hung an azure planet he recognized instantly. Am I outside Earth? He muttered, stretching his limbs. He switched on his super hearing and sifted through the incoming information. Chaos, despair, cries, and cheers. This world teetered on the edge of apocalypse, but many people still clung to hope, shouting encouragement to one another. Leon picked out the lines he wanted to hear. Come on, Ultraman, the future of humanity rests on you. Come on, Ultraman, he thought. An Ultraman world. A final battle, perhaps. He listened harder, then his expression shifted. Through the static and the electromagnetic cacophony came other sounds, strains of struggle, grunts, and pained exclamations. It sounded like two beings fighting with everything they had. Leon turned in space. The scene behind him revealed itself. Across the void beyond Earth hovered a disc-shaped machine, over 1,000 meters across, blocking the sky. It was pouring out deadly rays toward the planet. From his perception, accustomed to gauging heat, he could tell the beam was around 10 million degrees Celsius. If it struck Earth directly, it would trigger a global extinction event. But two figures stood between the machine and the planet, both 40 to 50 meters tall, one red and blue, the other red and black. Leon's mind supplied the names before he could even think them through. Is that Giga Endra and Cosmos and Justice Ultraman? Had he stumbled into the final act of the Cosmos Ultraman live-action film? Pieces of memory slid into place. In this world, Delesson, the multiverse's enforcer and prophet, had judged humanity a future threat to cosmic stability and sent agents to wipe it out. He'd unleashed Giga Endra, an ultimate reset machine, to erase humanity preemptively. Cosmos and Justice had teamed up to stop it, but even together, they couldn't defeat the mass-produced Giga Endra. The machine had pushed Earth to the brink. At the most desperate moment, as the two Ultramen were being overwhelmed, they fused under the reset light, summoning the will of the great universe. Leiji Duo. Leon watched the desperate resistance. Even fused, the two Ultramen were being forced back, inching closer to the machine. He drifted a little to the side and waited. The two should be able to handle themselves, and the third clone, his traversing ability might unlock here, would likely be an Ultraman. He had keyed the traversing ability with the phrase, affinity for the universe. Maybe, he thought, he could ask Leiji Duo to let him nurture the clone. He decided to wait and ask once the new being appeared. Cosmos and Justice were weakening. Their resistance grew thin and ragged. Earth's people called out in despair as the reset light engulfed them. There was a violent explosion in space. Hope seemed to shatter. Then, from the heart of the blast, a brilliant light rose, sacred, majestic, vast. Leon felt a wave of déjà vu, as if memories and the present had folded together. He almost heard the triumphant notes of an entrance theme. As the glare faded, Leiji Duo stood revealed, divine and composed of silver, blue, and black, as if he were the condensed essence of the universe itself. Leiji Duo, a miracle born of the great universe's will, described as an omnipotent god with eternal infinite power. Leon's mind spun. Could such a being really become his clone? How would one even begin to nurture a cosmic-level powerhouse? Should he ask for a sliver of power directly? Should he shout, like those new generation Ultramen, "Please lend me your light, Leiji Duo"? He trailed off in thought. Suddenly, Leiji Duo looked directly at him. Leon's heart leapt. The Ultraman's profound eyes met his, and then Leiji Duo nodded gently. Leon realized with a jolt that, though sound doesn't travel in space, his earlier mutterings must have been conveyed through the traversing bridge to the cosmic consciousness of this universe. The will of the great universe, Leiji Duo, its agent, would therefore already know his request. He gathered himself and called out, "Leiji Duo Ultraman, can you give me a ray of light? There's a huge crisis in my world, and I need to nurture a clone of you." Leiji Duo nodded again and pointed toward Giga Endra. Leon followed the gesture. The ring-shaped machine was recharging, preparing another reset blast. Leiji Duo, still aloof, hadn't spoken. His meaning was clear: deal with Giga Endra. That, it seemed, was the condition for granting light. Of course, Leiji Duo could have destroyed Giga Endra himself, but by setting the condition, he preserved a balance. No one owed the other anything. The giants of light, Leon reflected, truly were the kindest and most righteous. He returned Leiji Duo's solemn nod of thanks, clenched his fists, and flew toward Giga Endra. Chapter 299, The Appearance of Zhang Droshin. Giga Endra was Deleshin's ultimate weapon. To Deleshin, it was a mass-producible asset, yet placed in any Ultraman special effects drama, it would play the final boss. Humanity's light cannons, capable of pulverizing asteroids, couldn't even leave a scratch. Combined beams from Cosmos and Justice had no effect. Its reset beam alone could easily fell the two Ultramen. For this battle, however, the beam's observed power had been dialed back. Its purpose now was to purge humanity and remake Earth's environment, not to obliterate everything. When Laedo appeared without warning, Giga Endra unleashed the reset beam at full force. Leon relaxed his hands and let Laedo's turn be taken by him. Heat vision. A crimson ray erupted and met the reset beam head-on. Normally, Leon's heat vision burned at roughly the temperature of the sun's surface, about 6,000 degrees Celsius. Compared to the reset beam's tens of millions of degrees, it was like a frost. At first, the heat vision gave ground. Leon wasn't surprised. He was testing limits. Giga Endra's reset beam was clearly stronger than Dormammu's energy blast when the Dark Dimension's Lord left his realm. It could destroy a planet, a weapon worthy of that title. Still, Leon felt no real fear, only a hunger to push further. He ramped up the heat vision. Temperature and force climbed, 10,000 degrees, 100,000, a million, 10 million. The crimson ray brightened as it climbed into white gold. Leon poured himself into the beam. The cold vacuum of space around them seemed to warm. From Earth, even sunlight couldn't hide the titanic energies colliding. Slowly but surely, Leon forced the reset beam back. Acceleration, pressure, and then, in a wordless flare, the reset beam dissipated completely. Leon's heat vision spread, and wrapped Giga Endra's 1,600-meter hull. Being bathed in tens of millions of degrees was like being plunged into the core of a star. The heat vision's force shoved Giga Endra away. Leon tapered the beam until he stopped. Even so, Leon was surprised. Giga Endra had taken that onslaught and still stood. Scorch marks blackened only patches of its outer surface. An invisible energy layer around its shell had been damaged, then began to self-repair. Its energy defenses were formidable, perhaps even tougher than Dormammu's. Leon's face hardened. He twisted his wrist. His strongest answer was physical. Giga Endra's combat pattern was blunt and predictable. As soon as its shields knit back together, it started building power again and fired the reset beam. Leon didn't try to avoid the blast. He flew straight at it and plunged into the beam. The reset beam bucked, but it was broken. Leon's body flooded with world power, a fusion of genetic primal energy and psychic force. The vast inner world projected outward. The starry sky world's amplification technique flared through every cell. Blood thundered in his veins. This was Leon's single most powerful strike. With the force of a compressed world, he punched through the reset beam. Momentum unbroken, his fist drove into Giga Endra. What had seemed an indestructible defense, the thing that rendered Earth's armies and 2 Ultramen helpless, shattered like a soap bubble. Leon's blow tore the machine apart, punching through it again and again until it came to pieces. He then raked heat vision across the wreckage until there was nothing left. In a few breaths, the planet-destroying weapon that had cast despair across Earth and the Ultramen was nothing but scrap. Silence, and then a roar of relief from people on Earth. Cheers for survival. Leon flew back to Leggero, and they exchanged a brief, respectful nod, the Ultraman nod. Leggero brushed his Aurora timer, and a vast glowing sphere appeared in his palm. Leon couldn't hide his excitement, but he remembered to ask for one thing. Leggero, Ultraman, I can only make clones weaker than me. I'll need you to tone the light down a bit. Leggero made no move to object. He simply opened his palm and let the light drift into Leon's inner world. Leon felt it. The aura was like his own, but it had already been weakened many times by Leggero. Of course, Leggero had anticipated this and handled it. Leon gave a grateful thumbs up. Words like awesome were the only ones that came to mind. Leggero, omnipotent, lawful, a guardian of universal justice, offered an unqualified, selfless help Leon hadn't felt from anyone since Tony and Pepper. Most allies, Biohazard World's world consciousness, Odin, even the Ancient One, helped with an eye to exchange. Utility drives favors. Only an existence like Leggero could act both justly and without calculation. I'll use the clones to uphold justice and order in my universe, Leon promised. He had nothing to give in return, so he offered that pledge instead. Leggero returned the Ultraman nod and remained silent. Leon thought he was the classic cool godly type, another of the mysterious 4. Saga was also reserved, but at least muttered a hum now and then. This one didn't even make a sound. Legendary warrior Leto, visitor from another universe, why do you protect these Earthlings? A vast, benevolent voice suddenly intoned across the universe. It reached Leon and even the people of Earth. Leon turned. In the depths of space, countless Gloaka motherships had appeared as if from nowhere. Delesian's vessels, each the size and power of an Ultraman like Cosmos. Behind that armada, a phantasmal light wheeled and rotated, dominating Leon's vision and stretching across most of the sky. It was unmistakable. Delesian had arrived. Chapter 11. Problems in the Making. A New Journey. Leon was a little surprised that Delesian had asked him a question. He thought for a moment and said, I'm from Earth too, though from another Earth. The real reason, of course, was the mission Leggero had given him, but Leon added that an Earthling naturally had to protect Earth. When he finished speaking, a brilliant light suddenly poured out from Leggero and wrapped around the god of the universe. Leggero split into 2, becoming Cosmos and Justice, the 2 sides of Leggero, one representing order, the other justice. Faced with Delesian's inquiry, Leggero was clearly reluctant to answer directly, so Cosmos and Justice stepped forward themselves. It was simpler after that. Both Cosmos and Justice firmly declared their faith in humanity. Delesian, with a remark that he too would believe in the Light Warriors and in humanity's persistence and hope, left the solar system with his fleet. Leon wasn't surprised. Humanity's belligerent nature had drawn Delesian to Earth, and the small hope people still clung to in despair had made him leave. The real immediate reason, though, was Lejeduo's appearance, itself the result of Cosmos and Justice sustaining fatal injuries while united. Leon stroked his chin, remembering comments from netizens in his previous life. Since Cosmos and Justice knew they could summon Lejeduo, they had started taking blows for others. Maybe when he returned to the Ultraman universe in the future, he'd see Lejeduo again. For now, he was eager to go back and nurture his clone. "Farewell, both of you," Leon nodded to Cosmos and Justice. "Eh?" Cosmos, who was looking back at Earth, panicked. "Are you leaving already? Did we not treat you well enough? How should I address you?" That flustered tone was clearly Musashi, who had merged with Cosmos. Leon smiled and waved. "The Earth that needed protection has been saved. We'll introduce ourselves next time. Goodbye, Cosmos and Justice." He activated his dimensional travel ability and returned to the Marvel Universe. Only Cosmos remained, filled with regret. What a pity. I wanted to invite him to Earth and introduce him to everyone. There's actually an Earthling who can defeat Giga Endra with his bare hands. Leon reappeared on the rooftop at the same moment he had left. He sat cross-legged and began to nurture his clone. Inside his world, the process was the same as when he had nurtured the Black Light clone. He activated his clone talent, and the world's power enveloped Lejeduo's light, beginning to analyze the biological information. Lejeduo was unimaginably powerful. His information was far more complex than anything Leon had encountered. The analysis should have taken a very long time, perhaps hundreds of years, but Lejeduo had already decrypted his own biological data. All Leon needed to do was read it. Less than a day passed in his inner world. The data reading finished, and the leftover energy of the Starry Sky world's source will reappeared, beginning to transform Lejeduo's light. After a while, the transformation completed, and the clone talent continued to operate. Then, unexpectedly, it stopped. Not stalled. It failed outright. "Failed!" Leon exclaimed. He hadn't thought failure impossible, but the deep disappointment still hit him. The scale of the loss took him several minutes to recover from. Lejeduo was simply too powerful, and this clone too important. Leon had overinvested his hopes. Once he calmed, he re-examined the situation. He checked his inner world status, his world's power reserves, and Lejeduo's light. So that's it. Leon found the problem. Lejeduo's aura and mine are similar, both at the World Master level. But his genetic level is 10,081, perfect genes. In the Starry Sky universe, 10,081 was regarded as a number of perfection. A perfect life's genetic level was a 10,081-fold multiplier. A life with such a genetic level was called a perfect life, possessing every necessary advantage and no defects, from cells to appearance, genes to flesh and blood. Perfect lives were rare. Their bodies could be immense, and they could receive unique innate techniques granted by the source will. So the reason Leon couldn't nurture the clone was simple. His genetic level was too low. "I can probably nurture a life up to about 20 times my genetic level," he calculated. "My main body's genetic level is 200, so I can at most nurture a life around 4,000. Lejeduo is far beyond that." Moreover, it was likely Lejeduo had deliberately weakened his light, otherwise his true genetic level would be even more unfathomable. "It's impossible right now," Leon mused, "but not hopeless. In the Starry Sky universe, because of the Source Will's suppression, only those at the Lawmaster level can modify their genes beyond 100-fold. But in the Marvel universe, that suppression doesn't apply. I can modify my main body's genes to increase my life level." He hesitated. "If I only use the genes the Black Light clone devoured as a reference, it'll take forever to raise myself enough to nurture Lejeduo's clone. From where I stand, the fastest way to significantly raise my main body's genetic level is to keep traveling through worlds and find the most suitable reference. There's only one place that could be fast enough, the DC universe." His eyes flickered. "Looks like it's time to visit DC. To be safe, I'll scout the movie version first." "What, you're going to DC?" Tony pushed his reclining chair back with a clatter and jumped up. "You finally can't resist going to find Kryptonite, can you?" "You little brat. If I didn't know better, I'd say you were going to sneak off alone and get stabbed by the Joker or impaled by Batman with Kryptonite." Tony, anxious, slammed on his armor and grabbed Leon's arm, staring like he was about to vanish. "You have to take me with you, Leon. We agreed on this." After the verbal tirade, he switched to guilt-tripping. "Going to another world to have fun on your own and leaving your lonely big brother behind. Are you even my little brother anymore?" Tony's voiced concern looped around, but his anxiety showed in every stiff line of his face. Leon felt equal parts exasperated and touched. He pushed Tony gently away. "All right, I'm telling you this because I want you to come with me," Leon said. "Go get ready. Once you're packed, we leave." He was quietly glad he'd checked on Tony. Looking at him, he knew that if he'd really gone to DC alone and Tony had found out, Tony would have been angry for weeks even if nothing had happened.